Welcome to the Science of Success with your host, Matt Bodner.
Welcome to the Science of Success. I'm your host, Matt Bodner. I'm an entrepreneur and investor in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm obsessed with the mindset of success and the psychology of performance. I've read hundreds of books, conducted countless hours of research and study, and I'm going to take you on a journey into the human mind and what makes peak performers tick, with a focus on always having our discussions rooted in psychological research and scientific fact, not opinion. In this episode, we discuss the inevitable technology shifts that will be impacting our future, the second industrial revolution, the importance of having an open mind, critical thinking, and seeking disconfirming evidence. We explore how to ask better questions and why it's so important that you do, and talk about some of the biggest technology risks with Wired's Kevin Kelly. The Science of Success continues to grow with now more than 1 million downloads, listeners in over 100 countries, hitting #1 new and noteworthy, and more. I get listener comments and emails all the time asking me, Matt, how do you organize and remember all this incredible information? A lot of our listeners are curious how I keep track of all the incredible knowledge I get from reading hundreds of books, interviewing amazing experts, listening to awesome podcasts, and more. Because of that, we've created an epic resource just for you, a detailed guide called How to Organize and Remember Everything. And you can get it completely for free by texting the word SMARTER to the number 44222. Again, it's a guide we created called How to Organize and Remember Everything. All you have to do to get it is to text the word SMARTER to the number 44222 or visit successpodcast.com and join our email list. In our previous episode, we discussed the experience trap and why someone who's been doing their job for 20 or 30 years may be no better and sometimes even worse than someone who has very little experience. We looked at the shocking truth behind 35 years of research that reveals what separates world-class performers from everybody else. We talked about how talent is overrated, misunderstood, and research says it doesn't even exist. And we go deep on the critically important concept of deliberate practice and much more with our guest, Jeff Colvin. If you want to uncover the secret behind what makes world-class performers so talented, listen to that episode. Lastly, if you want to get all the incredible information in this show, links, transcripts, everything we're going to talk about, and much more, be sure to check out our show notes. Just go to successpodcast.com and hit the show notes button at the top. Today, we have another amazing guest on the show, Kevin Kelly. Kevin is the senior Maverick and co-founder of Wired magazine. He's also the co-founder of the All Species Foundation, which seeks to catalog and identify every living species on Earth, as well as the Rosetta Project, building an archive of all documented human language and much more. He's a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of several books, including The Inevitable, Understanding the 12 Technological Forces That Will Shape Our Future. His work has been featured in Forbes, the Smithsonian, and much more. Kevin, welcome to the Science of Success.
Hey, it's my honor and privilege for being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, we're very excited to have you on today. So I'd love to start out, I'm sure many listeners are kind of familiar with you and your story. Tell us a little bit about, the premise for the new book, The Inevitable, and kind of what really drove you to write it.
The book in brief is a projection of the next 20 to 30 years in mostly digital technology and what those long-term trends may look like. I don't try to predict the specifics in any way. This is much more of a kind of all things being equal, this is how it's going to lean in these directions. And there are roughly 12 interrelated directions. They're kind of all leaning in one large direction, but these 12 forces, you could think of them as these 12 forces are things that are going to happen kind of no matter what we do, but there's still plenty of decisions that we have to make in terms of the character of these specifics. And the short version of the book is I'm suggesting that we embrace some of these things, which sound a little scary, like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, but that we embrace these in order to steer them, in order to form them into the versions that we want and a future that's friendly for us.
So obviously the title kind of implies this, but tell me more about the inevitability of many of these forces. Why are they inevitable, and why does that make it so important that we embrace them?
So the inevitability is a soft version that comes from the very physics, the very material world that they're all made from. Maybe a kind of a way to think about this is imagine kind of a rain falling down a valley. Well, the direction, the path of a particular raindrop as it hits the hillside and it finds its way down is completely unpredictable, but the general direction is known. It's down. It's going to go down no matter what. And this direction comes from the kind of the physics of the entire terrain. And a lot of technology is really bound by the physics. And I think once you have invented electrical wires and switches and stuff, you're going to come upon the idea of telephones inevitably. And we know that because there were hundreds of people working on it. Edison was the 32nd inventor of the electric light bulb because it was inevitable. And so while the electric light was inevitable, the particular bulb was not. While the telephone was inevitable, the iPhone was not. While the internet will happen once you have the telephone, Twitter or Facebook are not inevitable. So the particulars can change, and we have decisions about whether something is national or international, whether it's open or closed, commercial or nonprofit. All these different characters of these technologies, which have their inevitability built into the physics, are something that we have. So we're going to, natural evolution, try to make, again and again, makes flapping wings because that's a very good solution. It makes four-legged animals, quadrupeds, because that's a natural solution that things arrive at again and again given our gravity. And so we extend that in the technological realm with making four wheels. And so four-wheeled vehicles are kind of inevitable. But of course, the Lamborghini's not. And so the kinds of forces I'm talking about, like artificial intelligence, virtual realities, these come about because as we make technology, this is a pattern things want to fall into because they're naturally inclined by physics to go in that direction. However, the particulars, the particular companies, the particular products, none of those are at all something we can predict.
And you had a really good example looking at using the example of electrification and then kind of demonstrating how that describes cognification. Can you explain that analogy and also talk about a little bit what cognification is or what it means to be cognified?
So one of the things that evolution has made, invented, created again and again in many different classes and kingdoms of life is mind. It keeps trying to make minds, and we're making minds, and we're putting little slivers of smartness into everything we make, and we're making some things very, very smart. That making things smarter, we don't really have a good English word, so I use cognify. We're cognifying. This cognification process happens again and again, and some things we're going to cognify to a very large extent. We will call those artificial intelligences. And this cognification process is going to lead to many different types of cognification. So there's many different modes, many different subroutines in our own minds, our own brains are, a suite, a portfolio of, dozens of different types of cognition, from perception to inductive reasoning to symbolic reasoning, arithmetic, emotional intelligence, spatial navigation. These are all different modes of thinking, and we have this very complicated suite, a symphony of different notes. The artificial minds that we make, some of them would be very simple with just a few of those types of thinking, like your calculator is smarter than you are in arithmetic right now, and your phone is sort of a better in spatial navigation than most of us are naturally. So we're going to fill the world with thousands of different species of thinking. It's like a zoo of possible minds, and most of these will be very different than humans. They'll think differently. And I'm suggesting that that's going to be their chief benefit, is that they think differently than we do. And so we will work with them to solve problems. The best chess player on the planet today is not an AI, it's an AI plus a human, because they're complementary kinds of intelligences. And so as we make this cognification, as we employ it, deploy it, we're going to do something very similar to what we did during the Industrial Revolution, which is that we're going to disperse it on a grid like the electrical grid, which sent out artificial power to every household, every farm, every factory. And this new artificial power allowed anybody to harness this artificial power and create things that no natural muscle power could create, throwing up skyscrapers or extending railways across a continent, generating or producing cloth by the mile, shoes by the pile. So this natural artificial power was distributed on this grid, and now we're going to take the artificial intelligence and we're going to distribute it on a grid called the cloud, and it'll become a commodity like electricity. It'll be a utility that anybody can get and use, and you can make you can use it to make whatever you want a little smarter in some dimension, and that ability will produce hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of new startups, of new inventions. People will ask themselves, what could I do with 1,000 minds, not human minds, but 1,000 minds working on a problem? Just like Industrial Revolution said, what could I do with 250 horsepower, 250 horses? What can I do with that? Well, you can do all kinds of things with it that we couldn't do before. And what can we do with 250 minds working on a problem day and night? And that's the second Industrial Revolution. Is going to impact everything from sports, fashion, religion, entertainment, military, education, business, the whole 9 yards. And not tomorrow, but within the 20 or 30 year horizon. However, today, you can buy some AI from Google or Microsoft, and you can start playing around with it, just like the early tinkerers and the Edisons of the world were playing around with electricity. And you'll discover some of the easy, low-hanging fruit that are going to be available, that just a few, that won't take that many hours to discover, just as the early guys hacking electricity discovered so many things in their early days.
You touched on the idea that these artificial intelligences in many cases are going to think differently or have almost artificial or alien forms of intelligence that are completely different and yet complementary to human intelligence. Tell me more about that.
So in general, we have no idea what intelligence is in humans or otherwise. We don't even know what animal intelligence really is. So we are ignorant about what we're trying to do. And in fact, one of the byproducts of the AI revolution will be that artificial intelligence will become a telescope, a microscope that will allow us to figure out what our own intelligence is, because we have difficulty experimenting on these, but by making thousands of different varieties and breaking them in so many ways, we'll find out what it is. But right now, today, we have no idea what this is, but we do know that it's not a single dimension, that the intelligence is a complicated process of many different types of thinking. Even if they may run on a similar matrix of the neurons, the organization, the way that the data is organized is different, and we will use those differences to engineer intelligences that we're going to optimize certain things that we want done. Like maybe it's a proof of scientific theorems. Maybe it's just as a speech listener. Maybe it's to have conversations. Maybe it's to figure out trajectories of a rocket. All these things can be optimized for very individual type applications. And there'll be ones that we'll consider more general purpose, but they can't They can't be. You can't optimize everything. That's the kind of engineering maximum, is that whatever system you are, is you can't optimize every single dimension. So there's always going to be trade-offs. And so some of these new kinds of minds that we may actually invent a whole new type of thinking that does not exist in nature, just as we did with flying. When we invented artificial flying, we studied the animals, bats and insects and birds, and they all flap their wings. So all the initial attempts at flying were flapping wings, which works well. When we finally invented artificial flying, we invented a type of flying which does not exist in nature, which is a fixed wing with a propeller. And we're probably do the same thing. We'll probably uncover some types of cognition that don't exist in the natural biological world, and we'll be able to do those in silicon. They will be different than our minds. And all these varieties, this zoo, will vary tremendously. And in many cases, the fact that they think differently is their chief asset, because in the connected world that we're operating in this new economy, the chief asset for innovation and wealth generation is being able to think differently. And as more of us are connected, when we get to the point when we have, 5 billion people connected all the time, 24 hours a day, thinking differently actually becomes difficult, because we have basically a group mind. And so having artificial intelligences that think differently will help us to maintain and think differently while we're connected to everybody else. So there's a double advantage to having AIs that think differently than humans.
And that makes me think about one of the other forces that you talk about, which is this idea of filtering. And in a world where we increasingly have so many things competing for our attention, how do we use technology to filter out and really focus on the most important things?
Yeah, I think that's the right place to start, which is that if you graph or start to measure the number of creative products that our society at large, the human species, is producing, it's mind-numbing. So even like the number of new songs that are written and produced every year, the number of new books, not just, even in English, but worldwide, or the number of videos, the number of new products that are available for sale, it's overwhelming and way, way beyond what any one person could attend to. And even if you had a filter, which is what we're talking about, some filter that would take away all the crap, which is most of the stuff, there's still way too much good stuff even to list and pay attention to, let alone to try out or enjoy. And so through technology, we're creating this avalanche of stuff, but we need technological help to actually sort through it. And we're going to have levels and levels of this, and there's kind of no escape. A lot of people feel, well, maybe the solution is just to turn it all off, all these filters, go naked, be real. But no, there are problems introduced by filters, but the problems introduced can only be really offset by yet other levels of filtering and looking at things and helping us to navigate through. So, the recommendation engines and the algorithmic connections that filters are necessary for us to navigate through this in any sense at all. And there are some problems in computer science that's called overfitting. So if you are really only seeing things that you already like, then you kind of get stuck on this local peak of optimization that prevents you from really seeing really great stuff, because you're too fit to what you've specified, and you aren't broad enough to really see something wider and better. And so we need all kinds of tricks, devices, additional technologies that can search wider, that can actually change our tastes, that actually can help us grow, that can help us see when we're being blinded by our own likes. There's lots of levels, and of course now we have the new challenge of fake news and alternative facts, where some of these filters have introduced polarization, has introduced kind of blindness, and so we again need to have additional layers of like truth signaling layer where things can be assigned a kind of a networked consensus on the probability of their being true, some kind of confidence level, like, this fact here has a 95% chance of being reliably true, and based on these sources, based on the many other sources that we also trust, that have a high trust value, that trust it. And so you have this kind of a citation index and like PageRank. So these things are all additional levels that we're going to bring in, and it's become even more complicated. It's never going to become simpler, and we will maybe require an education to learn how to use it. I mean, you and I and all your listeners have spent 4 years at least learning how to read and write. It was not easy. We just didn't absorb it by being around books. And some of this kind of stuff of learning how to use, being aware of how to become literate in social media or filtering news, critical reading. This may be a literacy that we actually have to teach people, and they may have to spend some years in learning how to become good at it. So we shouldn't necessarily expect that people can just sort of learn how to navigate through this stuff without any kind of disciplined practice. But it's not going to become easier. It's going to become ever more complicated.
I think that's such a vital challenge, and something, I mean, part of the kind of reason that we even do this podcast is to help teach people, help enlighten people, and talk to people about seeking disconfirming evidence and things that are kind of outside their comfort zone, and really looking at the data and the science and trying to figure out, what is actually true and what is real. And,
I would consider that a literacy, and that's that kind of techno literacy, maybe is what I would call it, is something that may have many dimensions, including the critical thinking that you're talking about. But that may be something that we actually have to teach.
I think that's a great idea. It's fascinating. And that's one of the problems I wanted to ask you about was, how do we solve this, as you called it, sort of overfitting, where everyone lives in essentially a bubble that is self-reinforcing of only information that they want and only information that they like?
Well, one of the reasons I travel a lot is for that very reason. It forces me into otherness. It forces me to be confronted with a different worldviews, a different point of view, and if I allow myself no escape from it. So it's visceral, it's full body, and there's certainly ways to travel where you're isolated. But again, I'm going for the raw and the remote, and there I'm allowing myself to have my mind changed. And I think I recommend that highly, particularly for young people, as a means to begin that habit of trying to see the world from a different point of view, of allowing yourself to be challenged by other views, which may be the majority in the places that you wind up in. And so that's for me a surefire way to do that. And I think it's so important for young people that I think we should, as a nation, subsidize it in the form of mandatory 2-year national service, where you have your choice to serve in the military or the Peace Corps or some kind of a service organization for 2 years without exceptions, including overseas somewhere. And it would radically change the tenor of our country. Besides the fact that you're mixing up with people that you didn't grow up with, you're also mixing up with people that are far outside of your own prejudices.
You also talk in the book about questioning and the how, as many of these technological forces reshape society, one of the most important skill sets is going to be the ability to ask great questions.
Yeah, I think in 30 years, if you want an answer, you're going to ask a machine. Machines will have very, very good answers. They're getting ever smarter, ever more knowledgeable. They'll be more conversational. And just as we kind of like, I don't know, I don't, if I can't remember, I don't remember how to spell things. I just ask Google, it tells me the correct way to spell stuff. And so we're going to rely on it for information, facts, and those nature of answers. But it's going to be a long time before these things, AIs, robots, can ask good questions, because a good question requires a very broad common sense education perspective. And that's sort of what we want to actually breed and teach in schools, is being able to ask good questions, because in some senses, both science and innovation are fundamentally ways of asking questions, like a what if. They're kinds of, they're explorations. They're not concerned about efficiency. They're very inefficient processes that entail sometimes wasting time and having failures, because you are, you have dead ends. You have things that don't work. And that nature of investigation, questioning, requires the broadest sense of being, and is the most productive in the long term, because that's where the new things come from. That's where empathy comes from. That's where our sense of vision all derive from. And teaching how to do that is, naturally some people are better than others, but everybody can be taught to be a little better at it. And I think that's one of the several key things, besides what we're just talking about, techno literacy, that you want to teach in schools, rather than how to regurgitate answers, which is sort of the industrial model.
How do you think we can, maybe as a simple starting point, how could somebody who's listening to this show start to ask better questions?
That's a great question. There you go. You asked a good question. I think, well, one thing I learned is, I had a kind of a rocky relationship with school. I was a real science math nerd, but my method of operation was very simple. I sat up front, and I was the guy who asked all the stupid questions that people felt that they wanted to ask but were too embarrassed to, but I would ask, because I have no embarrassment at all about asking questions. Basically, if I don't understand, I figure nobody else understands. That's basically what what I'm doing when I'm editing a piece for like Wired, is like, look, if I don't understand it, the reader is not going to understand it. So one of the suggestions I'm kind of pointing to is, there are no dumb questions, really. I mean, if you ask it in sincerity, and if you're really not being dumb, but if you really are struggling with understanding something, don't be afraid to ask the question, because it's likely, if you're having problems, so are other people. And but then really listen. That's the difference. And so there are no real dumb questions. And then secondly, there's a good question is one that generates not just an answer, but other good questions from it. And so, how should I say it? There's a way of there's a lateral thinking that's very productive, which is to approach the question, to approach the subject from a different angle. So while you shouldn't be afraid to ask the stupid question, you should also be trying to think about a question that hasn't been asked before. So that's a little harder to do. That requires a little bit more work. But there are several tricks. I mean, I hung around Marvin Minsky, the great AI guru at MIT, for a long time, and he had a remarkable way of asking questions. And after observing him, I'm pretty sure that what it was is he believed that he was like a Martian, that he wasn't human. Or that he was a robot or something. He was just not human. He would ask the question sort of as if he was a machine, and that he didn't know all the things that humans knew. And that was refreshing and infuriating at the same time, but he got to ask really great questions because he was coming from this other angle and another person I know, Brian Eno, who's the rock star, does the same thing. He has adopted some point of view where he's going to ask the question as if he's not just another Englishman somewhere. He's coming from an alien point of view, which enables him to bring a different insight to it. And so that would be maybe my second suggestion is like, don't be afraid of obvious questions, but also try and ask a question as if you're standing from a different place than most people are standing.
Those are both great suggestions. And I agree along the same lines of the kind of the concept, as you called it, of techno literacy. I think the ability to ask great questions is another skill set that is really worthwhile to cultivate. I'm curious, out of the various forces you described, what changes do you see coming down the pike that you're most scared of, and why?
That's a good question. So I want to make it clear that I'm not a utopian. I am not a dystopian. I'm a protopian, meaning that I believe that technology will produces almost as many new problems as it solves, but that in the new problems it solves, the solutions to those are additional new technologies which will produce new problems. But that what we get from that cycle is a tiny, minute improvement of a few percent per year that's compounded over centuries that becomes civilization and progress. So that progress is real, even though it's very, very slight. That's what I call protopia progress. It's propelling forward. So there are tons of new things that are coming about and tons of things to worry about if you want to worry. One of my concerns about these new technologies is what we're seeing. Actually, there's a great example today, which is cyber war, cyber conflict. Right now, today, as we're speaking, there was a malware attack in Ukraine that kind of shut down the country. And I think we're just seeing the beginning of this. Our society is so dependent on this stuff that it is very susceptible to disruption. I think the likelihood of an entire internet falling down is really hard to do, and it'd be really, really hard to engineer, even if you had the assignment. But that there's going to be sicknesses, ailments, injuries, local injuries, all the time. And my real fear is not those kind of what we might call ordinary injuries, but a cyber war like conflict, a state to state, because we don't have a consensus right now on what's acceptable in this new realm. We have lots of treaties and agreements about conventional warfare. It seems odd that we have, rules for war, but that's better than no rules. But we don't have them in any real operational way with the cyber conflict. And when we introduce artificial intelligence to it, it's even going to be amplified up even more. And my fear is that there'll be some really bad thing that'll happen before there's an agreement that no, we don't want that to happen. So right now, is it okay for cyber things to take down the banking system somewhere, and is it okay to work in to take down the hospital computers? And the answer is that there is an agreement. There's not an agreement because the major states involved in this, the U.S., Russia, China, maybe Israel, Iran, North Korea, none of these states are even acknowledging that they're doing this, and there's all deniability, and it's very hard to ascertain what's really going on. And so until there's some really widespread agreement that no, this is not permissible, I think that which is not permissible will happen. And doesn't have to be that way, but I'm not sure what would have to happen before there would be some agreement. So this happens before disaster strikes, but that's my current fear.
It seems like in many ways, I mean, as you said recently in the news, it seems like the number of kind of cyber attacks and various things going on continues to escalate, or at least it seems like I hear about more and more frequently.
Yeah.
In many cases, it seems there's kind of a state actor that's tied to it in some way or another. But as you said, it's often very kind of, they have plausible deniability or it's untraceable. So I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, a generation ago, a technological generation, in the 90s, say, or even 2000s, the US and Western Europe to some extent was, that was the entire world in terms of the internet. But now, every country is, just jam-packed. They've got their smartphones, ubiquitous smartphones and stuff. And so this is now it's a global neighborhood. It's a global platform. And so a lot of these things are happening in places where, there's more politics involved. There may be less security. And I think we're going to see a lot more of it before I don't know, just a lot more of it in general. So it's sort of like the body has grown and now there's sort of more ways to injure it. We will keep adding more and more layers to prevent the injury, but there will always be new ways to injure it or to exploit it. And again, I think overall, the likelihood of the whole thing collapsing become less and less. But of course, whatever major damage is occurred becomes more and more impactful. So it wouldn't take a very big injury to really scare everybody. And again, if we go back to like something like terrorism, the point of terror, of course, is not really to hurt, but to inflict terror to get your demands. I think it'll become very easy to terrorize the electronic body, the body electric, even with relatively what we call minor injuries to the whole, and you could really do a lot of damage just by the terror of it. And that's a second level of worry that, you don't need to do very much to actually have everybody go crazy.
And what would you say to somebody maybe listening to this and I think this applies not only to kind of this specific context, but more broadly to the whole thesis of the book that says or thinks to themselves, oh yeah, all these technology changes, AI, robotics, everything else sounds cool, but I don't really think that's going to happen. It's, these Silicon Valley futurists with all these fancy ideas. What would you say to somebody who thinks something like that?
Yeah. So, and, in 5 years, they will certainly be able to say that because they'll say, well, none of this has happened. Look at it, VR is still not present. They're still not AI. So one thing is the conversation that I'm really having is talking about 30 years, 20 to 30 years, okay? Because I don't think these are necessarily going to happen necessarily that fast. But there are kind of the general tendency is to maybe overestimate how soon they're going to happen and underestimate the lasting impact that they have. So I think, you should be maybe skeptical about the speed, but in terms of the general direction, I don't know. I don't know what to say because people have been saying this all along. There was a huge denial, I guess I would call it, about the early days of the internet that this would ever become mainstream. I mean, this was the recurring criticism of our enthusiasm for the internet when it was still just typing, when it was, just text. It was like, no, this is marginal. This is appealing to teenage boys in the basement. This is not about the mass. This is not a mass mainstream thing. And it was like nothing you could say would kind of convince anybody that otherwise. And so to say that AI won't get big, I think it won't get maybe big fast, and you could be right about it for a long time. And then there's the other issue of the definition, right? I mean, AI is artificial intelligence is defined as that which we can't do. So people will say, well, AI, we don't have AI yet. Well, if you had Alexa or Siri 50 years ago, everybody would absolutely agree that it was artificial intelligence. I woke up, Alexa. And so, yes, even in probably 30 years from now, people will say, well, we still don't have AI. And that's because we keep redefining it as to what the thing that we can't do yet. So they would be right in that sense. In 30 years, we'll say, yeah, we still don't have AI. It's just all a pipe dream. But yet at the same time, the cars will be driving themselves. And people say, well, that's not really AI. That's just machine learning. That's just That's just brute force. That's just computers. And so there's, I don't know, there's really no, we're talking about the future, so there's really no argument about it. The only thing I would say is, look, even if we don't arrive there, even if there isn't ever conscious AIs walking around in humanoid bodies, even if there isn't some AI in your ear that's talking to you like a young girl, like in Her, even if we don't have that, the general direction of where we're headed is still in that direction. And that's sort of what I'm talking about in the book. It's like, all things being equal, we're going to move in that direction. Maybe we don't ever arrive there, but we're going to move in that direction. And so knowing that we're going in that direction is extremely helpful, and you'll be able to reap the benefits and minimize the harm if you understand that that's the general direction that we're going, even if we never arrive.
What would be one kind of simple piece of homework or starting point that you would give to somebody listening to this conversation as a way to maybe concretely implement some of the concepts we talked about?
So I think one of the most enabling forces at work is artificial intelligence, and I think it's going to impact everything we do in all aspects of our lives, from food, fashion, sports, religion, military, education, business. And I would say a piece of homework is buy some AI right now. Just log on to Google, TensorFlow, or IBM or Microsoft, purchase some AI and start fooling around with it. Just like if my advice, if 150 years ago when the Industrial Revolution was coming on, I'm doing a podcast, and the guy, he's saying, for all those farmers out there, what would you suggest the best way for them to prepare themselves for the Industrial Revolution? And I would say, make a battery and start fooling around with electricity. Just you'll probably discover something amazing. You'll be able to, you'll educate yourself. And so I think dabbling in these things, educating yourself so that we can talk about them intelligently, so that as we come to regulate them and to tame them and domesticate them, that we do out of experience. That it's not just something you've read about, that you've actually, spent time. So my entire enthusiasm and optimism comes a lot from the fact that I've, been living online since 1981 or something, and, just experiencing what happens when people go digital. And it's not based so much on reading, it's based on the fact that I have an actual experience from this. And I think as much as you could do to experience these new technologies, it would really inform all the other questions you might have about where to go next.
And where can listeners find you and the book online?
So my homepage is my initials, kk.org. And a lot of my older books are actually available for free. I posted the entire text of my first book while it was still in copyright on the web for free, because at that time I owned digital rights, because at the time I made the contract, New York publishers didn't think digital rights were at all valuable. They didn't know what they were. And my second book is also up in full on my website, kk.org. There are Kindle, of course, now Kindle and paperback editions of The Inevitable, and weirdly, the paperback edition is cheaper than the Kindle edition. Don't ask. I have no idea why. And I sometimes tweet as Kevin2, the number 2 Kelly. In fact, I tweeted I would call the entire book of The Inevitable at one point. In the sense, I tweeted a sentence from every page of the book. I didn't ask permission. I just did it. And my recent little thing is from Cool Tools is we send out a one-page email newsletter thing, a one-pager that's 6 very brief recommendations of cool stuff, tips, places to go, eat, tools, whatever. Very one sentence, a couple sentence recommendations for 6 things every Sunday. Is called Recommendo with one M, recommendo.com, and you can sign up there.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all your incredible insights. Been an honor to have you on here.
It's been a real delight. Thank you for your great questions. You're obviously a human. And so I appreciate the support and enthusiasm for my work.
Thank you so much for listening to The Science of Success. Listeners like you are why we do this podcast. The emails and stories we receive from listeners around the globe bring us joy and fuel our mission to unleash human potential. I love hearing from listeners. If you want to reach out, share your story, or just say hi, shoot me an email. My email is matt@successpodcast.com. That's MATT @successpodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I read and respond to every single listener email. The greatest compliment you can give us is a referral to a friend, either live or online. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us an awesome review and subscribe on iTunes. That helps more and more people discover the science of success. I get a ton of listeners asking, Matt, how do you organize and remember all of this information? Because of that, we've created an amazing free guide for all of our listeners. You can get it by texting the word SMARTER, that's SMARTER, to the number 44222, or by going to successpodcast.com, that's successpodcast.com, and joining our email list. If you want to get all this incredible information, links, transcripts, everything we just talked about, and much more, be sure to check out our show notes. Just go to successpodcast.com and hit the show notes button at the top. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Science of Success.